Today I'm sharing a personal inner journey that I hope might help you if you feel anxious about the future. It's one that led me to a profound shift in how I perceive and feel about our environmental situation. It's a journey from climate anxiety to eco grief, and I'm well on the way to acceptance, I think, and I believe it's an important perspective to share. Now, I have been aware of the climate crisis and deforestation and other environmental issues since I was a teenager, and other issues of poverty and famine. My reading and learning about environmental issues centred around climate change and the fact that we were putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than Earth's systems could process. The result was that global temperatures are rising and will continue to rise until we stop emitting carbon dioxide. For a while, I assumed that the government and charities had it sorted. The people in charge didn't seem too worried. They said we'd have technology in the near future that would fix it all, like more solar panels and electric vehicles. But I started to look at the numbers, and on basically every environmental measure, things were getting worse. I got really worried that we weren't going to make the changes required as a society in order to prevent these catastrophes from happening. I realised that there were other people who had the same feeling. I started to learn about more issues other than climate change, like mining pollution and devastation of ecosystems from agriculture. The IPCC reports kept coming out that said the scenarios they were predicting were getting worse and worse, and the window to fix everything was shrinking rapidly. There were seemingly no policies coming out of any government that would actually change the trajectory of the situation. There was lots of talking, but no action. But no one seemed to outwardly be saying that in general conversation or on the social media I saw. When I went onto Facebook and Instagram, I saw posts about working together to stop the climate crisis and ways to reduce your footprint, which is all fine and good stuff, but it didn't tell me whether we were actually on track to fix things or not. I saw stats saying that if we all did meatless Mondays, we would save carbon emissions equivalent to however many millions of cars being taken off the road. But continuously left out of the message was whether this or any other action we could take as individuals or small communities would stop the climate crisis. I see constant tips and tricks and hacks and encouragement because things are bad, but if we just work together, vote for the right people, take small actions that build up over time, we can fix it. It's this idea that there's things that might happen, and then there's people saying that they really will happen, but we don't really know, and we don't know how bad it will be. But actually the government says that it's all going to be okay as long as you vote them in. And then there's all these environmental groups that are working really hard and being pretty positive about stuff. 1 minute I'm reading an article about how climate change is going to be awful, and then the next thing I see an ad for going on a shopping spree, and the world seems to be ticking along just fine. I think that's where the anxiety came from in some regards. There's this mixed messaging, this undercurrent of anxiety, because it's not the issue that is front and center in any area of society. Whether or not something is sustainable or ecologically sound is hardly ever discussed in any area of life, except as an afterthought, when it should be the core issue. If ecology is not working properly, then nothing else matters because we can't live our lives. So I had this pull back and forth between hope for the future and worry for the future and this unknown, and it made me really anxious. I started to learn more about other environmental problems other than climate change, and this is where it sort of led me. The species loss, the pollution, the deforestation, the explosion of human population, adding billions of new people within decades. I continued to see more and more evidence for the disastrous consequences of our actions. And while there were some little wins, sorry, I have my dog down here. While there were some little wins, the overall trajectory of these problems seemed to be down, down, down. And then I started learning about terms like ecological overshoot and collapse, not just climate change or the climate crisis. I started to understand that climate change is just one symptom of a much larger issue, a combination of different issues, and there is no clear way out. And the things that are required to actually turn this ship around would take millions, tens of millions of people taking very specific actions immediately, basically an entire overhaul of our economic, political, and cultural systems. And when I thought really hard about the actual chances of that occurring, that's when I switched from anxiety to grief. That's when I realised that I was feeling grief for a future that I now knew was never coming. There was no way it could possibly happen. And that was really tough. I fell into a pit of despair for a while there, and it was harder to enjoy things. Everything had a layer of grey over the top of it because everywhere I looked, I thought, all of this is completely unsustainable. All of this has to stop soon. All of this is causing so much damage. And the best evidence we have says that it's going to be within my lifetime that this collapse occurs. And it's awful. It's just awful. And there's nothing that can stop it at this point. Modern industrial civilization is inherently unsustainable. It always had a time limit. We have passed into ecological overshoot decades ago, and because of how physics works, following overshoot, there must be a collapse. No amount of mining for solar panels or buying electric cars is going to stop it. Now that I understand the evidence around ecological limits and tipping points and the energy required to feed a growing consumer capitalist society, I just don't see any way for the future to be better than the past in terms of quality of life and health of the biosphere on most measures for pretty much every human being on Earth. And that is heavy. But once I realised I was actually feeling grief more than worry or anxiety, I could frame the way I think about my feelings in a different way. I wasn't holding on to false hope anymore. I no longer had thoughts like, if we only did this or if we only did that, because I realised that they were often futile. Elliot Jacobson, the mathematician, has this big list of things that he calls the AGHs, ain't gonna happen. Because people are always like, oh, if we build more solar panels, or if we all go vegan, and I say that as a vegan, or if we all switch to electric cars, or if we stop flying, or if we grow more forests, then everything will be okay. Sure, if all of that happened, it would make the future better on many measures. But there's no evidence to suggest that it will happen unless we're forced to make change. And there's no one forcing us. It will be the economic and broader ecological and climatic forces that make us change as part of collapse. All this stuff, when people talk of the renewable transition, the tech fixes and the green growth and the decoupling of growth from emissions, it ain't gonna happen. There's no good reason to believe that society as a whole will make the required changes to avoid catastrophic climate chaos, continued biodiversity loss, or suddenly start to use resources sustainably. It is built into the way we run society since the start of capitalism, and maybe even before that, to the dawn of agriculture. Our desire to exploit and plunder goes back thousands of years. It's not the way that humans have lived on the earth for the majority of our history, but it's solidified now, especially since we have access to fossil fuels. And I don't see any reason to think that it will be any different now unless it has to be, if that makes sense. And all of this allowed me to sit back and think, well, shit. I can still do my best to make things less bad for the world in general and people around me. But I also focused on accepting what is going to happen, just hardcore acceptance. Acceptance is what got me through getting dumped by my boyfriend a long time ago, before my husband. I focused on the techniques that they talk about in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is one of which is just being with what is happening right now and accepting that, not trying to change it or fix it or even necessarily being happy about it, just accepting what is going on. And that's been incredibly helpful for me in simply acknowledging the truth about the world. It's been really good because I didn't realize how much I was holding on to false hope. I was falling into a bit of toxic positivity there for a while, especially as I went down the rabbit hole of certain environmental ideas and movements. But as someone who I used to work for once said, hope is not a strategy. Hope tends to suggest that someone else somewhere is fixing the problem, or that someday somehow things will be better, but I don't know how. It's a bit of a vague thing on its own. And it might help you in the moment to think things are not so bad, but it doesn't help you or anyone else in the long term because you're not well prepared for what is coming. And it doesn't help the world just having a vague sense of hope. It doesn't help the world become a better place either, because if you have hope that things will be all right, it sort of takes the pressure off the accelerator to make things happen yourself. I know now that I was experiencing eco-anxiety, and I'm now moving through eco-grief and into acceptance. I know this because of the weight that is sitting on my heart and the fact that now it is a sort of quiet weight rather than a noisy one. And it's getting less heavy over time as I work through my grief and move towards what I'm referring to as collapse acceptance. With eco-anxiety, there was always turbulence within me. Anxiety and worry are like waves. They keep you on edge, always anticipating the next crisis. But grief and despair, while heavy, are a different part of the storm. It's like being in the eye of a storm, a calmness amidst the chaos. The shift from anxiety to grief doesn't mean giving up. It's about acknowledging the reality we're in and finding strength in our shared humanity. We're grieving for the whole planet, but in that grief, we can discover a deeper connection to the earth, and that includes to each other as well. With eco-grief, there is no way out, much like most other grief. You just work through. And hopefully, at some point, there is a clarity that appears about what is and what will be, even though none of us can truly predict the future. But there is a sort of certainty, a profound acknowledgement that things won't go back to the way they were. I can recognize now that we're in a state of irreversible change. And in that grief and starting to come out the other side of it, I have found a kind of peace. With eco-anxiety, much of the time that I spent thinking about the environment, I was worrying and fearing whether I would lose what I had and feeling out of control because I was always trying to find out what governments or environmental groups or someone else were doing to fix things. I didn't have much agency around what was happening. Now that I've spent time grieving the inevitable loss of the lifestyle and surroundings that we are so lucky to have right now, I can spend more time appreciating what I've got, while still keeping the values of living lightly on the earth and veganism and living a low energy lifestyle. I don't worry so much about what the future holds because I've let go of the picture that I had in my head that it turned out could never have come true. I appreciate that this might seem like a doomer perspective. We're often seen as being doomers if we talk about the changes that are already locked into our biosphere from our past actions, as well as the low or even zero chance of certain outcomes being achieved. But if a doomer is the name given to those who've ditched the worry and uncertainty and are allowing ourselves to grieve and are working towards acceptance, then that label is fine with me. So that's the difference for me between anxiety and grief as it applies to collapse and to ecological issues. It doesn't mean that I'm happy all the time now. I still grieve most days for what is lost and what will be lost in the future, because grief is never done, even for people who are not thinking about this big picture stuff. But I feel I have, at least in some part, accepted the reality of the situation, and I'm now much more well positioned and well prepared for what is coming for all of us. And I hope that if you are going through this process, then you can also start to come out the other side of it as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I appreciate you for watching. Be safe and well, and I'll see you next time.